Bill will join us later, and then we will open it up to questions. I think generally people are aware, but there may be some people, of course, who are on for the first time. So this is being sponsored by the LaRouche PAC, LaRouche Political Action Committee. And there's a statement that we had out about the idea, no zombie election, time to discuss the truth, as sort of the general topic here. But what we're going to do is go right, first of all, to Kirk, and then Barbara will follow, and then we'll begin right away with the questions and answers. We may be joined by a couple of other individuals, but we'll find out sort of as things go along. So, Kirk, why don't you get us started?
Okay, thank you, Dennis. Hello to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to be brief in my opening statement because everyone who is watching, no doubt, knows that we are in the biggest, most serious battle for truth that we have ever seen in these United States. I'm 75 years old, and never in my life have I seen the propaganda war, the censorship that's going on to stop the truth from getting out. I'm going to tell you that this is as bad in these United States, this so-called nation of freedoms. This is as bad as anything the Soviet Union ever did. And in fact, I'm going to tell you the censorship is probably more effective today than the Soviets could have done because they didn't have the internet at its disposal. Today, we have many news outlets, many social platforms, and yet most of them are distorting or blocking the flow of truth about the Biden family and about Anthony Bobulinski, the man who's blowing the whistle on the corruption and the international influence buying that's going on, or that went on, no doubt is still going on. It is absolutely shocking. And yet, if you look around you, you wouldn't know anything like this was happening. It's almost surreal. Everyone's going to work. People are getting paid. They're eating lunch. They're on vacation. They get in their cars. They drive. Everything seems normal. And yet our minds are being controlled by people who are hell-bent on denying us the truth. This is the most serious moment in our nation's history. And I worry about what this means for the near term, let alone the longer term. Dennis?
Okay, Barbara.
I don't think I could top Kurt in terms of the actual expression of what is actually happening and what the environment is out there. You have a story which, from any standpoint of a legitimate news story, is out there. It essentially says that Hunter Biden, not the drug-addled person that we've been led to believe he is, was up for sale, and what he was selling was the office of the Vice President of the United States during the Obama administration, not to one, not to two, not to three, but to several foreign governments. Among them, the Chinese, most particularly, but also, that nest of corruption in Ukraine. People will recall that when the President of the United States, on a telephone call with the new incoming president of Ukraine, just simply referenced the corruption of the Biden family, he was immediately almost subject to impeachment proceedings before the United States Congress. This is a taboo subject. Why is it taboo? Well, basically everything that the Democrats did in 2016 to the Trump campaign and in the transition was done through precisely this nest of corruption, this known nest of corruption. It is not like it was not known what Hunter Biden was. As a matter of fact, the opposition research file for the Clinton campaign in 2016 published an expose of Hunter Biden and Joe Biden's weakness in the New York Times. It was a shot across the bow, telling Joe Biden, don't run against me. We've had an entire coup d'etat with the Clinton machinery in line with the intelligence community, in line with the British and certain geopolitical magicians who actually seek to determine the future of this country for the next 50 years. And the way that they intend to do it is precisely what you're seeing now. A major news story, a laptop computer with all the dirty dealings, some of it crude, some of it obscene, some of it so ridiculous you don't even want to go there. But in significant respect, detailing a criminal and a money laundering operation into the vice president's office has been made public by a guy who, inadvertently sort of ended up with it because he was repairing it. And on it, he found all sorts of things. And the FBI said, oh, we don't want to touch that. And then they thought about it and they said, then we'll come back and we'll take it. And they did. They took it over a year ago. And they sat on it during the impeachment proceedings. In other words, the things which could have been used to say that was a perfectly legitimate question by the President of the United States of the incoming president of Ukraine. What about this? Is your government for sale? Burisma, if you know the story, actually took U.S. aid money and just stole it outright. Was that a legitimate question for the State Department? You bet. So what you have here is pretty astounding. Hunter Biden's business partner, who met with Joe Biden personally, was on Tucker Carlson last night. Nobody else would air it other than the president himself at a rally and Tucker Carlson, who apparently had to get permission from Fox News to air it. And they agreed, reluctantly, at least as Tucker portrayed it, to air it. And he said what Joe Biden has been saying is absolute BS. That he did know about these business deals, that he was the quote unquote chairman of this money laundering, corrupt enterprise, which, had all sorts of nefarious foreign influencers in it and on it. After all, these guys think that, basically they're going to control China and they're going to control Russia, and it's all going to be one big globalist paradise in the end. That's their theory. And we're all going to make tons and tons of money. And all of those deplorables out there and all those working and middle classes, well, you chose to be where you are. You didn't actually get in on our scheme. It truly is Orwellian. It is very scary. But it also has exposed people to just how far we've come down this road of allowing ourselves to be controlled, of the Constitution itself hanging by the thinnest of threads when it comes to the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, all of the things which we treasure as guaranteed American rights. We do not have a free press. The free press exists among the people who are on this call and on all of the independent people out there who are trying to get to the truth and trying to get the truth out, but totally divorced from the mainstream media. They're completely controlled. Were one of them to publish this story today, you would have all of their advertisers start to pull out. That's how the game is actually being played now. It's a little wonderful thing called corporativism, otherwise known as fascism. You can look it up and you'll see that my discussion is really quite precise. But I think what we need to talk about today is, given this is the situation, how do we think about the next week, week and a half? How do we actually think about shifting the whole thing? What kind of education do we have to give to the American people who are very much awakened? There is a mass strike going out there. If you actually see the footage, which I accumulated for a video we just did this week, it's everywhere. People with handwritten signs, people with handmade floats, people with, flags on their cars, people organizing spontaneously by going to their local newspaper and saying, hey, I got a Facebook group. Please come to my Facebook group for a Trump rally. And then setting up the Facebook organizing around the thing, and 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 people are in these parades all over the country, including in places where, people think that's a blue state. New York, New Jersey, Staten Island, California, all over. And it's like, a situation in which they're blacking that out also. Don't you think this would be a pretty major thing to look at when this is occurring all around people? Why isn't it occurring? It's really simple. They want to try and hold down the vote for Trump by any means necessary. They want to make people feel like, I'm just an individual out here. I'm not going to, step out of being scared, etc. If you just take a drive around, you'll find that there's Harris Biden signs out, but there are not very many of them out. I just did a little survey today, taking a drive around Loudoun County, Virginia. And normally what you'd see is two sets of signs. You wouldn't see Harris Biden enthusiastic to actually prevent a wild neighbor of one of our friends here from actually taking them down and destroying them. So the point is that the American people are really on the march, and whatever happens on Tuesday, they need leadership. They need to be told, basically, here's where we go next. Here's the policies. Here's the programs we're campaigning for. Here's how we actually clean up this mess, because we've got to win. And that's the issue.
Okay, let's go to questions. Let me just say one thing so people know who may not be aware of who Kirk is. Kirk was a technical analyst at National Security Agency together with Bill Binney. Kirk was there for 25 years. I think Bill was there for over 30 years. Together, they and one other colleague, Ed Loomis, created what was called the Thin Thread System. It's a system of surveillance and detection that would, in fact, have allowed the 9/11 event to be thoroughly stopped before it occurred. I just wanted to make sure that that was known, and that, and as we go into the conversation, people who may not have known that do know that. One other element, just to say, is, of course, as people know, as we are having this congressional testimony going on concerning the question of censorship on the internet. That's also a feature of, I know, some of the questions we've already received, but we're going to now go right to the Zoom platform where we have questions, people who are there. So can we go to Anne, who I believe is the first questioner?
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate being able to join this very elite group, and your minds are so incredible, and your experience and depth of knowledge is so invaluable to just maintaining freedom in this country. So I appreciate you holding these. I hope it's going to be weekly. We'll see. And as we were just discussing, there is testimony going on right now. I watched some of it this morning in true disgust, because not only did Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg look like robots, they look like they're disinterested robots. And this is a war, Twitter, Facebook, Google, against the United States of America, the Republic itself. They are showing themselves to be. I also had the opportunity to listen to a phone call between some congressional staffers and a member of Facebook. And it was obviously they were very friendly with each other. They saw themselves on the same team, and they were talking about how they were silencing speech and going after organizations that, used hashtags like Save the Children, because they were thinking that these organizations were trying to do harm. But in fact, these people that are speaking out against the Child Protective Services, which has been called out by our own Secretary of State as being one of the #1 places where traffickers look and prey upon children to, perform human trafficking. And at the end of the day, the apparatus of Facebook, Twitter, and Google are nothing more than an extension of the black hats of our intelligence community being weaponized by the holdovers of the last 40 and 50 years that are silencing our country. So, you guys come from the, the world of government with a long career, Kirk, and I know Bill's not on the call, but how are we going to dismantle this deep state? Because this is deep. I mean, today the DOJ had a press conference about some Chinese spy related stuff. It just seems with 180 some thousand sealed indictments, this is sort of a really long road to hoe. Are we just going to have to just keep clawing our way for the next 5 to 10 years to take our country back? Or is there going to be some sort of a bigger flush to at least reestablish our fundamental constitutional rights and get rid of people like I heard on that phone call, get rid of people like Dorsey and Zuckerberg?
Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Ann. You have described the problem perfectly. It didn't happen overnight. It's been going on for decades as these people have become entrenched throughout government. We can't get rid of it in a week, in a month, or even a year. It's going to take another Donald Trump term, full term of 4 years, in order to make a major dent in the problem. What I mean is getting rid of bad apples. It's going to be upsetting, as all things worth doing are. They're never pleasant. There's going to be some pain. There'll be a few mistakes, hopefully very few, in terms of judging character. But what Trump needs to do is hire a core group of samurais. And I call them that because this task isn't to go in and run an agency per se. It's to go in and clean out an agency. It's very hard to do both. So I envision two people at the head of each agency. One is the boss, the manager, the secretary of, you put the title, and then a samurai swordsman who has the very focused task of creating a small group of people to go through the records and the reputations and the behaviors of everyone on board, at least in the management chain, down to the lowest level of management. And there's going to have to be a culling. People, and we're going to have to separate the wheat from the chaff, the honest with the dishonest, the corrupt, the righteous from the corrupt. That's what I'm looking for. And that's always hard to do in government because government record keeping isn't that good. They play with personnel performance appraisals all the time. I just had a friend at NSA tell me there are no longer write-ups at NSA describing things that a person's done. You just get an X if you're satisfactory or no X if you're not. This has all been done purposefully. When I went into NSA years ago, we had levels of performance, all the way up to 7 being the max. And you had to do fairly pithy write-ups to substantiate why your employee ought to get a 7-level performance appraisal. And that was the top 2 or 3% of the working population. All that's gone. So what's the record you have to look at? You have to really dig deep to get to who is this person? What kind of a person is this? Now, I'm really bringing this down to earth because this is how it would have to be done. So it won't be easy. It can be done. Again, some mistakes will be made, and it has to be rather ruthless. Put wise people in charge, but it has to be ruthless. And that's what we're going to have to do, and it's going to take a while.
If I may, I have a follow-up question, because two things come to mind with what you're talking about, Kirk, is Section 230. Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court just recently finally interpreted Section 230, how it's supposed to be applied and how it's been misunderstood by the court system, mostly, I would guess, intentionally, to allow this apparatus from the deep state to operate without impunity. With impunity, I should say. So if we start to interpret Section 230 properly, or maybe do away with it, either one, if that goes into effect, and of course the Schedule F, the executive order President Trump put out on October 22nd, where you really can start to hold these federal deep state employees accountable based on performance, like he did with the VA. Do those two things offer a pretty big reset and get these people to fall in line and start living under the expectation of our constitutional freedoms?
Yeah, I think they do, and it's not the answer, but it's a first step, and then there will be the lengthy process to invoke it. Now, Section 230 is different, but that's very political, and we need people in Congress, in the legislative branches, to change the law so that we can really hold accountable these social platforms and news media, who essentially are propaganda platforms and could care less about truth. They're agenda driven, and we've got to get rid of this. Years ago, we did get rid of it. Even the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, had a lot of authority to worry about just those things, trying to get rid of bias in our communication systems. And so we have our work cut out there, but I am hopeful that the law can be changed if we get the right people into Congress. The president, I suppose, could issue another presidential executive order and do it that way. But I would hope Congress will come in and really pass good legislation to lay down what bad practices are and will not be tolerated, with very substantive fines and penalties for not doing so.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to Diane, who has a written question, I wanted to just ask Barbara if you have any response to what was just said.
No, I mean, the principle is there. You have to defend the First Amendment. Okay, free speech is foundational in our republic. We're built on the idea that the way you resolve disputes is you fight it out in the public mind freely. You don't basically punish thought crimes. So it is not just what's going on in Silicon Valley. It's going on in corporations, where people are getting fired if they have the wrong ideas. It's going on in schools where, a kid bringing a Trump flag to school gets expelled from school. It is an across the board hemorrhage, if you will, of First Amendment freedoms, which have to be counteracted. It really does have to start at the Justice Department. It really does have to start right after the election, I think, with some huge mobilization of private litigation on these issues. Anytime that it happens, there should be a lawsuit. And people who are interested in defending freedom should be funding those lawsuits. In other words, we just have to launch an offensive going the other way.
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. I think we should go to Diane, who has a written question, I understand. I'm going to just...
Sure. I actually have several, and some of these people are also on live from Rogue Media. Carlos is the question: do you believe that there is a behind-the-scenes military operation taking place to counter the efforts to remove President Trump?
Repeat it one more time, Diane. I want to get the words right.
Okay, the question is whether there is a behind-the-scenes military operation taking place to counter the operation to remove President Trump. In other words, are there military and others trying to make sure this coup fails?
I have to honestly say I have no hints of such a thing. Doesn't mean it couldn't be, but I would find it a bit surprising because I think that ilk of person within the military would pretty much obey the rules and not try to intervene unless called upon in some way that's tied to the national interest, security, that kind of thing. But I don't have any information that suggests such a thing.
Okay. Barbara, you have any comment on that?
It's really simple. What Colonel Black has been suggesting was the sort of end product of the Transition Integrity Project and all of these other operations to somehow get the military to not, in the midst of civil unrest, to actually not obey the orders of the commander-in-chief, I think is, a possibility, but it also goes against standing military orders. So I agree with Kirk. I think that you're going to have something of a conflict in which, I don't think people are willing to essentially, assuming the president gets the right kind of vote, I don't think people are going to really want to risk their entire careers, on something like this. I could be wrong, but, the illegality, the behind the scenes operation is those who are engaged in sedition. It's not those who are engaged in regular order in the military. And I think that's the distinction.
Okay, I've got basically a bit of the same problem that Diane has, a series of questions, and it's better to really, I'm going to combine some elements, because this is what it essentially, the question is, which is, how did we get 17 intelligence agencies? How was it the case that the National Security Act of 1947 was reinterpreted to allow for this sort of monstrous growth of intelligence? And there was a particular question which was asked concerning Executive Order 12333, which had been mentioned by Bill Binney on the last of these press availabilities, and how these actions and executive orders are used for the purpose of creating a universal surveillance state. So, Barbara, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Kirk on that.
That's a pretty broad question. Look, if you know your history, if you're my generation, you grew up with the Church Committee, which looked at the perversion of the U.S. intelligence community, which preceded it. The 1968 through 1972 intelligence community was the subject, a topic of a major Senate investigation. And what was discovered there was that much of the press was complicit in writing propaganda, like now. Stories could be censored, although by no means was it to the extent of the total information warfare we have now. Intelligence agents actually worked for the news media to actually write stories. And that's the way it was run. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was running counterintelligence operations inside the United States, actually killing people who were dissidents. The CIA had all sorts of programs under J.J. Angleton, many of which targeted my organization, targeted Lyndon LaRouche personally. So that all came out in the Church Committee hearings. And I can just tell you my personal experience of it. We went from being investigated as part of what was commonly known as COINTELPRO. In fact, LaRouche's organization was considered to be the most dangerous target in COINTELPRO by the FBI. Subsequent files showed. To, after the Church Committee, Griffin Bell, who was then the Attorney General of the United States, invited Mr. LaRouche, I represented him in that, down to the Justice Department for a personal apology. And we were given access to the innards of the Justice Department and contact points so that all of the then ongoing operations against us could be shut down. Now, that didn't go away after the Church Committee, and many people who were deeply invested in what has been called the military-industrial complex by the president snapped it back. 9/11 was a major consolidation. The Reagan administration, which is who passed EO 12333, which Bill talks about, that executive order had several very significant features to it. Number one, it allowed for privatization of intelligence operations under that executive order. So that if you're looking to say, oh, the CIA did that, you have to actually ask yourself, am I talking about the CIA, or am I talking about all sorts of private organizations who are authorized to conduct intelligence operations on behalf of the CIA, a term commonly called quangos. That was a really big deal, allowing for that form of privatization. Second, in terms of counterintelligence operations, a specific authorization was given to lie to the public when sources and methods were actually at stake, and to deny that an operation had actually taken place in and of itself. So there you have a key aspect of the original sin, if you will. People ask, how come Clapper can get up there and just lie his butt off? Well, 12333 is part of the reason why that happens. Third, a totally off the books, and most of the programs, and I'm sure Kirk can fill this in, and I don't know if we're treading on classified territory here, but many of the programs which Snowden, for example, talked about in NSA never run through the FISA court at all. They're actually directly authorized under EO 12333, the entire surveillance operation. So you have that in the Reagan administration as an inflection point. George H.W. Bush ran operations, he said, under EO 12333 directly out of the vice president's office. Just off the books operations, assassinating people, all sorts of things. Seymour Hersh has written extensively about this. The authorization was under 12333 for doing this stuff. Then you had 9/11, which was the next inflection point, and a gigantic growth, a huge growth of intelligence agencies. The alleged reason for this is, how come we didn't spot the 9/11 terrorists? How come we basically couldn't figure it out, given our intelligence capacities? And Kirk can tell you, as Bill has told you, that there was a system in place which they had invented to actually do that, but it was junked in favor of private defense contractors, the whole privatization process which has gone on, making millions of bucks for various private contractors when their system didn't work at all. But, that's why we have 17 intelligence services spread out like crazy. Many of them not really doing a very good job analyzing threats and figuring out how to respond to them. And that's a long history, but I'm sure Kirk can fill in certain details in it.
Well, and I would say that Barbara just gave a wonderful background, very clearly presented and accurate, as far as I'm concerned, of the realities of the intelligence community. Excuse me for that. The one thing I would say is that if you listen carefully to what Barbara was describing for you, it is clear to me that the whole intelligence apparatus has crossed a line, a big line. In fact, it is the most powerful threat to our way of governing this nation, to the Constitution itself. The document, it is the very document it is supposed to serve. It is usurping. It has become the elephant in the room. And it's controlled by people with bad intentions. People who don't really, in their actions, support the Constitution. It has gotten into the hands of people who are more enamored with influence and power and money. In other words, we have corrupted ourselves. It's like Moses coming down the mountain with the 10 Commandments, watching the revelry, the drinking, the worshiping of false gods at the bottom of the mountain, and saying, "Woe unto you, Israel." I say, "Woe unto you, United States." Look what you have fostered. Look at what you have planted. And what are we to do? We've got to clean up this mess if we are ever to have a chance of righting the ship along the lines the Constitution intended.
Okay, we've got about a half an hour left in what we're doing today, and I'm going to announce a request for next three people. Carlos is the first, John O is the second, O-L, and Leroy. Okay, so that will be, if you have questions, you're in line, and that's what we're going to do. So if Carlos is available, let's go to him.
Yes, do I unmute myself?
Oh, we can see you, but we can't hear you. Can you unmute?
There we go. Is it unmuted now?
Mm,
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for this today. I really appreciate everyone's time and the opportunity to ask my question. We have now witnessed two top law enforcement officers, one previously Jeff Sessions, who recused himself through the entire Russian investigation, and now William Barr, really not doing anything to counter the effects, to follow through, to restore law and order in our country. What is it going to take for President Trump to restore law and order when the top leader, the Department of Justice, is really at this point not participating at all in terms of those efforts? What's it going to take? A military intervention of some sort? How do we move forward through this when the top law enforcement officer in our country refuses to take action?
Okay, which one? Barbara, you want to start? You want Kirk?
Yeah, I'll start. Kurt and I are going to
Great.
continue to. I'm still holding out a little bit of hope for Barr, but we'll see. The point is that look, Trump is already saying that if elected, he's going to fire Gina Haspel, he's going to fire Chris Wray, he's going to fire Mike Esper. That's a pretty strong statement of intent. If he follows through and does it, the issue is going to become, who does he replace them with? I think he has to look to the people who fought the fight already and have proved themselves, around the coup itself. He has to think about, depending on what the situation in the House is, whether he wants to put someone like Devin Nunes. Not that I agree with everything that Devin Nunes says or does, but he withstood a horrendous psychological assault to simply get to and shred a lot of the narratives in the coup, and they did so successfully. John Radcliffe at DNI is part of that particular tradition. So there are people out there who've actually been through the last 4 years of battle. And those are the people who've actually proved themselves by fighting in terms of competencies to take over in these places where the battles have to be fought. You've got to, what Kurt's talking about is two things at once. The samurai has to establish the standards for the agencies. And they need to be, in many respects, new standards. What has gone on is that you have the entire, what some people refer to as the administrative estate, i.e. that part of the executive branch which is not elected, has largely been, peopled by a generation of, rabidly wild, corrupt people with an ideology on the Democratic side. Clearly, the worst possible result of this election and what the intent is to establish a one-party government. Now, I'm not for partisanship. I think it's a very, very bad thing. But a one-party government obviously is even worse than a partisan stalemate. And that's clearly what the intention is here when we're talking about packing the Supreme Court, when we're talking about destroying the filibuster rule, when we're talking about getting extra votes in the Senate through giving Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico statehood, regardless of the merits of that proposition as a proposition in and of itself. So that's how I would answer the question, is that personnel is policy. There are people who've been fighting a decent fight within the government. There are people like Kirk and Bill Binney, if he wanted to do it, who could come in and probably clean up NSA quite quickly. I'm sure there are similar people that exist in the VIPs and other places that could do the same thing as CIA. So the people are there. It's just the intention to say, okay, exactly as Kirk said, this is that we've crossed a red line. We need to go back and redo the American Revolution here, adhering to the Constitution yet again, and doing away with all of these horrendous things which we've done to sort of destroy ourselves.
Okay, Kirk?
Yeah, again, Barbara is spot on. And I have, I wanted to comment specifically on observing the fact that of Carlos, what Carlos pointed out in his question was that now we have a William Barr who doesn't seem to be doing anything. It's Jeff Sessions all over again. It tempts me to suggest that anyone who has grown up within government as a lawyer is too compromised for whatever reason to do what is needed. You don't really need a lawyer to be attorney general. I don't think that's a requirement. We have people on the Supreme Court who have never been a judge. So what I am suggesting is bring a person in who's a good executive, a person who knows how to carry out the charter of the DOJ and come in and kick butt. Make the deputy a lawyer. Rely on the team of lawyers if you want to, but make sure they're the good ones. And they're the ones you can trust to follow the spirit and the intent and the law as outlined in our Constitution. And go from there. I'm tired of lawyers. And I've got to tell you, my personal gut, I can't put a number on it, but a large portion of the legal lawyer population out there is not about the law. It's about winning cases, making money, and getting influence and getting a nice job. Our whole emphasis is in the wrong place. We have to stop worshiping at the altar of the almighty dollar. And that proposition itself is not easy. How do you teach values such that money can be important, but it should never be the driver of how one conducts themselves in a court of law, in an important executive position, serving the people of the United States in government, whatever. This values issue cannot be fixed overnight, but we've got to begin in the schools. We've got to begin there.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for the question. Are we ready to go to John?
Hi, this is John. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly, sir.
Oh, excellent. Well, I'm really honored to be among which I think some of the most distinguished minds we have. Thanks for Harley Schlanger invited me today. It's my first participation here. I have just been deplatformed from my channel. It was called McDuff, Kennedy's Man to Smash the CIA. Was a channel in which I was combining my research into my father's career with study of what's gone wrong with this country during the same period of time and up to now. And I've spent almost 2 years building the channel. I had over 11,000 subscribers, and it just disappeared 2 days ago. So I'm rebuilding at my website, which is screamingospreys.com. And from there, I'll be setting up a new YouTube channel for my lives. But screamingospreys.com is how to get in touch with me right now. And oops, there's a okay. Well, I did have a question, which was, it seems to me that everybody is correct that we've got to get good people into the top offices of our administration. And the first person that has to go, in my mind, is William Barr. For some reason, the president doesn't have the power to do it right now, or he would have done it by now. So something is holding the president back from doing what's in the best interest of the country. In my opinion, this is a situation where we have got to first survive and then survey the wreckage and then do what we need to do. And by surviving, I mean we've just got to re-elect President Trump. This is like, as you all said, and I don't have to repeat it, if we lose this one, then it's George Orwell's playbook from here on out, and it's not going to be pretty. So I just suggest that immediately after we win this presidential contest, we've got to start reforming Congress. Because I was thinking, I don't know a single congressperson, Senate or House, that I personally would trust with these decisions. And my question to you is, do any of you know any Congress people that you would entrust this weighty decision to, such as who should the president replace William Barr with, and that type of trust, you know? So I'm looking for somebody in Congress that I can trust. And if not, I'm looking for a complete clean sweep out of Capitol Hill.
Actually, we have somebody that's with us, I believe, on the line that may have something to say about that question. But in any case, we'll come back to that. Mr. Stone, Mr. Stone, we seem to have you on. And the last questioner was very angry at Mr. William Barr, and he was asking about replacing everybody, including the entire Congress. Since you've had something to do with campaigns before and this one as well, we'd like to ask you not just about that question. We're happy to see you. Go ahead and make whatever statement you can, and just wanted to kind of catch you up to where we were in the press availability. So go right ahead. I think we're going to see if we can hear you now.
All right, great.
Great.
Do we have audio?
Yes.
Great. All right, terrific. So let me address the most burning question of the moment, which is what will happen in next Tuesday's election. We have a real contrast between the two campaigns. Joe Biden is like a basketball team in the fourth quarter that has a lead and is now just trying to avoid any error. He's trying to sit on and ride out a lead. By the way, that's the most dangerous place to be in American politics because it's boring. It gets no public attention and no interest. Richard Nixon tried this in 1968. He came within a hair of losing that contest based on his desire to play it safe and have essentially nothing to say in the closing days. Biden is locked down in his basement. He ventures out every couple days to meet with a very small group of voters from very far away, essentially just to prove to the public that he's actually still alive. By contrast, and his message is a dour
Right, you're having a problem.
Dark second lockdown. He has no. It's all extraordinarily down. Contrast that with the president, who is a happy warrior, who's out talking about an upbeat, positive vision for the country, who is stressing economic growth and opportunity, who has a great record to run on and is running on it, who also doesn't have any problem taking the wood to Joe Biden on the burgeoning international bribery scandal, corruption scandal that the mainstream media in the United States is trying desperately to pretend isn't even happening. In the 40 years I have been in American politics, I have never seen this level of manipulation and censorship by the story. There are no arguments for Biden's laptop. We now have not one, but two of his former business partners who have stepped forward, essentially to corroborate the allegations based on firsthand knowledge. They would make terrific witnesses. They also have their own sets of emails that are compromising for Hunter Biden in his relationship with the Chinese. If you examine the polls prior to the pandemic, when Donald Trump was leading Joe Biden by 9, and if you examine the polls post-pandemic in which the president is trailing Joe Biden by 10, really efficiently the same number, and then you examine the internal polling to see who has moved, it's quite interesting. Virtually no voter group moved place except for African Americans and Hispanics. Among those two groups, the president was winning a historically high level pre-pandemic, and his support was literally cut in half, I think, by the sour economy caused by the pandemic. Could we get a little air here, because I can't sweat and work at the same time? Okay. We are therefore, were I running the Trump campaign, which I am not, I would be moving resources into Spanish language radio and urban radio in Cleveland, in Detroit, in Milwaukee, in Philadelphia, in Richmond, in Charlotte, in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, in Orlando, Tampa, and so on. The campaign does not appear to be doing that. I would also caution them that they have a terrific Spanish language add-on in Florida, but it makes reference to Cubans being for Donald Trump. Now, as someone who's married to a Cuban American whose family fled Castro, I get it, but it's important that they recognize that the majority of Hispanics voting in Florida are not Cuban. They are Puerto Rican, Venezuelan, Colombian, Dominican, and interestingly, culturally, they have a long time animus with the Cubans. But again, then I'm not running the Trump campaign. So there's also a very substantial problem in that when one has run a presidential campaign, you understand the necessity, particularly when you are not opposed for renomination, of running a very lean overhead in the early months of the campaign and hoarding your money for television, cable, radio, and digital advertising, maybe even telephones and text messages in the final 6 to 8 weeks. The Trump campaign has not done that. In fact, they have squandered their billion-dollar financial advantage, and they're now being outbought in the swing states by Joe Biden at a level of 4-to-1 on broadcast, 6-to-1 on cable, 3-to-1 on radio in those few places where they are on, and 4-to-1 on digital advertising. Sadly, these things do matter. It is a classic spending mistake. I think Brad Parscale is responsible for it. You might notice he is no longer with the campaign. So you have the same set of institutional problems we've discussed before. the three major obstacles for the president's reelection. Obstacle one, the corporate-owned news media that simply doesn't report anything negative on Joe Biden and the Democrats, magnifies any error by the president, and then in many cases just prints outright falsehoods about the campaign, the country, and so on. Now, that would not be such a problem if the workaround of access to the social media platforms, which we had in 2016, was still in place. But unfortunately, we have seen a systematic program of censorship on all of the social media platforms of Republicans and Christians and libertarians and conservatives and Trump supporters. And that is now manifesting itself. Attorney General Barr had more than sufficient time to bring antitrust actions against every one of these companies. He has not done so. I have no long-term confidence that, particularly if Biden should win, that special counsel John Durham is going to charge anyone. I think even if the president does win, there's a substantial chance that Durham won't charge anyone either, which is outrageous because, as you know, declassified documents now prove definitively that John Brennan, James Clapper, James Comey, Andrew McCabe, Rod Rosenstein, Andrew Weissman, and others, Susan Rice, Ambassador Samantha Powers, they engaged in treasonous, criminal, seditious activities. We know now definitively that there was not a rich mosaic of evidence justifying the opening of the Mueller investigation. As James Comey said, there was one fabricated document, a document that the FBI knew was fabricated from day one, and they based an entire coup d'etat, attempted coup d'etat, on that document. This is disgraceful, but I must observe that we do have a two-tiered justice system. This is a system in which people like Roger Stone and General Michael Flynn are prosecuted for fabricated political crimes, while real criminals engaged in real treason go untouched. It is very hard to understand, other than to say, as much as I love the president, I think he has received some bad advice, most of it from Steve Bannon. Mr. Bannon turns out to be a neocon quisling. Ignore his talk about nationalism or American sovereignty. That is all a smokescreen. Every major neocon, including the UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, Rex Tillerson, who is the Secretary of State, H.R. McMaster, who was our national security advisor, even John Kelly, the White House chief of staff, all of the neocons got there through the sufferance of Steve Bannon. As I think most of you know, Mr. Bannon also lied on the stand during my trial. We know that definitively because a comparison of his sworn House Intelligence Committee testimony when compared to his testimony at my trial are diametrically contradictory. And therefore, he either lied to the House committee, exactly what I was charged with, or he lied on the stand at my trial. Knowing the facts, I can tell you, he lied at my trial at the behest of Robert Mueller, proving yet again that he is not the patriot that he pretends to be. With that, I'm happy to take a few questions, but I'm on my way to a speech, but I'm happy to entertain questions while I can.
Okay, thanks a lot, Roger. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to first of all ask Mr. Kirk Wiebe of NSA if he's got anything to say in response to you, and then I'll ask Barbara, and then we'll see where we are. Okay, so Kirk?
Well, I've never had a chance to talk with Roger Stone. I'm honored to do so, Mr. Stone. And God bless you for your work And the description of the minefield that you just laid out was superb, absolutely superb. And I appreciate it for my own edification.
I appreciate that.
Okay. Barbara, you have anything?
Roger, what do we do? I mean, the point that you've made is very, very clear. What would you tell everybody out there who's going to be watching this thing at this point? How do we actually kick over this chessboard at this point to make sure the president gets reelected?
Well, Barbara, first of all, I'm a big, big fan of your work. You're a great writer. You're a great researcher. You tell the truth. And I'm glad to be with you today. I've just written a piece for the Daily Caller that went up only minutes ago that essentially explains precisely how the president can win and why he may still win. It is always better to have the upbeat, positive message. Essentially, the president has adopted Ronald Reagan's reelection message that America will have a bright future, that we can have peace and prosperity. And it is much better to have this kind of positive, uplifting vision in the close of your campaign. You also want to peak your campaign the day before the election. So it is, there's several things I think we can do as individuals. First of all, extinguish any talk of landslides or cakewalks. So many of our own supporters believe that we are headed for greener pastures and this is going to be easy. It is not. It is going to be very, very close. The other thing that comes to mind is the fact that there is a very specific illegal ballot harvesting operation being run by Mark Elias, the same lawyer who laundered the payments for the Steele dossier, is being run by a man by Norm Eisen, dirty, who is essentially a left-wing dirty trickster, someone who specializes in election theft abroad, and then bolstering it with violence in the streets to try to force through regime change. Mr. Eisen has actually written a book called Playbook. It's all there for you to see. These are criminal activities. If we had an attorney general, perhaps they would be prosecuted, but I hold out very little hope of that. The third individual in this triumvirate of criminals is a man named Neil Keitel. You may recognize the name. He wrote a piece for the Atlantic magazine, which is a mouthpiece for the deep state, which said that I should be re-prosecuted. He's one of these lawyers who jumps up and down constantly screaming about the rule of law, but has no concerns about the rule of law when Barack Obama and Joe Biden use the full authority of the U.S. government and the entire capability of the intelligence agencies to spy on and mount an illegal coup against the president. He has no problem with the rule of law when Bill Clinton meets with Attorney General Loretta Lynch on the tarmac to fix his wife's illegal server case. He never quibbles about the rule of law when Andrew Weissman wipes 31 cell phones used by the Mueller's dirty cops clean. Destruction of evidence during an investigation, in this case, the Durham investigation, is a felony that gets a 20-year sentence. Far more serious than, say, the crime of allegedly lying to Congress. So they are going to have a very aggressive attempt to steal this election. We have seen unprecedented levels of early evidence of voter fraud. But as I say in my Daily Caller piece, in the early voting and in the absentee voting, Republicans, at least in Florida, are more than holding their own. So I'm still optimistic that this can be pulled off. it is vital that the campaign focus on the African American and Hispanic communities. There literally are no other votes in play. I have studied the polling very, very carefully, and essentially everyone else stayed in place, and that is where the president must gain.
Okay, I think there's a question. Diane, do you have something?
Yes, actually, in part for a friend of mine who you may know, Derek Gibson, who's an African-American candidate for governor of New York in 2022, and who's very involved in the opportunity zones. And you sort of alluded to it, but I can say here in Manhattan, and there are Trump trains and parades even right in Manhattan. They're largely led by African-American, Latino voters and others joining in. Is there something specific you would say to them and to Derek Gibson, who is working to organize this all over New York and the greater metropolitan area?
Well, it would be a mistake to assume that the African American community and the Latino community have the same political attitudes, because they do not. The single most effective issue among African Americans is Joe Biden's sponsorship and authorship of the 1994 crime bill, which required the harsh mandatory penalties for the first time nonviolent crime of possession of small amounts of drugs for personal use. This is responsible for the mass incarceration of hundreds of thousands of Black people who are not violent criminals, people who belong in drug treatment programs, not in the very expensive taxpayer-funded incarceration. This law has destroyed lives, destroyed families, rehabilitated no one, and cost taxpayers at this point billions to house and feed people who are not violent criminals. This Joe Biden in the debate last week accused the president of using dog whistles. This is a guy who said, if the Wilmington, Delaware schools are desegregated, they will be a jungle, and I don't want my daughter going to school in a jungle. You cannot get any more racist than that. Joe Biden is a fraud. His running mate, Kamala Harris, prosecuted those drug crimes based on Biden's bill with zeal. She put many, many, many Black people in jail for smoking marijuana. Yet when she was asked about her own marijuana use in college, she giggled and then lied about smoking grass while listening to Tupac. When you look at the year, Tupac wasn't even around when she was in college. She can't even keep her lies straight. So I think that's the best issue. For Hispanics, it is strictly an economic issue. Hispanics are very entrepreneurial. They want a piece of the American pie. We had the highest level of employment among Hispanic voters in U.S. history during the early days of the Trump campaign. And I argue, who better to revive the American economy than someone who's already done so? The president gave us the highest levels of employment, the highest job creation, the greatest wage growth in American history. His program that combines cutting taxes and regulations is the magic wand that Barack Obama said did not exist. So I think the economic issues and the economic future are the best issues to elevate with Hispanic voters.
Great, thanks.
Okay, I think very good. Anything further, Barbara or Kirk, for him?
No, I just am very happy that we saw Mr. Stone today. I'm really, really glad. Bless you, Roger. This was a very, very useful for us orientation.
Well, I
Especially
wish I could spend more time with you, but you have all been extraordinarily loyal friends throughout a horrific ordeal for me and my family. So God bless you. God bless you in your deliberations today. Do not give up faith. This election is still up for grabs. and if we all work together, I still believe the president can pull off yet another upset victory that will make the elites puke. It's great to be with you.
All right. Thank you.
Great, Roger. Thank you.
Well said.
All right. Fine. Very good. So do we have, is Leroy there, still there? Oh, and we have to get back to John's question. Actually, he was asking about the Congress, if there would be, I think Roger may have answered it actually, but he may have more. So do we have anybody else there in the queue, or are we at the end? Oh, we got Ann back.
Well, actually, my question was for Roger Stone, but that's all right. I will get him on Steel Truth and ask him directly myself. So it pertains to his conundrum with Steve Bannon, who's definitely a conundrum.
Okay, great. Very good. Okay, Ann. So, okay, I think that may very well be it. I think we're pretty much at time anyway. Let me just ask for some, well, I think we should take summary remarks. Barbara, why don't we start with you and then we'll go to Kirk.
Sure. I mean, I think Roger's, ending, he gave us a map. And I think basically we have to think about that map and think about how we can facilitate this. We kind of have a unique perspective here in terms of thinking about what actual economic growth would look like, given that this was Lyndon LaRouche's central preoccupation throughout his life. So I think it sort of is incumbent upon us to think through how we can boost the idea of an economic renaissance in the United States immediately upon Donald Trump's reelection, and just begin to put that out there to people as an optimistic message. The point is that I think there's a certain level of complacency, which he addressed. And, I think that we've got to get this video out with his assessment clearly, as far widely as we can, speaking directly to the president's campaign. This is how we can win. So that's how I would end my journey here today.
Okay, great. Thank you. Kirk?
Yeah, I think everything's been covered that we can cover. If there was anything I would recommend, it would be on election fraud. If anyone out there senses election fraud, I want to give you a phone number. It's called the Election Integrity Hotline with the True the Vote organization, led by Miss Catherine Engelbrecht. She's the lady that took on the IRS and won. That phone number is 855-702-0702. I'll say that again, 855-702-0702. Now, there's one other thing. On this matter of Barr doing nothing, I would suggest people call the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice and complain. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press is a civil right. And if anything can move the DOJ at this point, other than politics, is the people making a distinct outcry. That phone number is 202-514-3847. Again, Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice, 202-514-3847. And I encourage every person listening to pick up the telephone and demand that the censorship be stopped immediately.
All right.
Dennis?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kirk. Thank you very much, Barbara. And thank you, everybody that participated and had a question and that was watching. We'll get this up on our site as soon as possible. I think everybody is now clear, very clear about what is possible and also what the obstacles are and what you yourself would need to do. If you are not, get in touch with us at LaRouche PAC. We have plenty of things for you to do. We have a call tomorrow evening where we'll be discussing various things, which is called The Principle of Power in the American Presidency. We have our Saturday meetings also, but you can go to our website, LaRouche PAC, and contribute and get involved. So thanks a lot for being part of this. And maybe we'll see you next week, given that somebody's talking about doing this weekly. We haven't decided anything like that. But in any case, thanks for participating today.
Thank you.